Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Candyman. So what Candyman is essentially about is basically we do still center on Cabrini Green, but we now center on an adult Anthony McCoy who he's living in Chicago with his girlfriend, and he is kind of like a struggling artist. It's very much his passion, but he can't seem to get it off the ground. And one day when he's discussing with his friends, they tell him about the legend of Candyman, and he feels very connected to this legend for sure, and he goes around to Cabrini Green to gain some inspiration about it. And the more he seems to uncover about the urban legend, the more he realizes the more he starts to realize just how deep he really is within this, that really does start to consume him. Eventually does summon the Candyman, which really changes his life forever. So Candyman overall, I was very excited for this film. I didn't really know exactly what this was going to be at first, but knowing that we're taking the Halloween approach where it's basically a sequel that's taking place years later, I was very much on board with that, and especially with what DeCosta was very much like teasing this as. This was going to be a very different vision of Candyman from what we're used to. You know, I was very excited to see how this would turn out. I did finally check out the original Candyman before this, and I have to say, I think it's probably one of the most socially relevant horror films that are out there. It was a film that was way ahead of its time. Yes, it was a slasher movie, but it's so much more than that. It is a story about white guilt. It is a story about white privilege in that way, but it's especially a story, I think, about exploiting certain legends and the effect that that can really have on you. How something that can be seen as a joke has far more deeper and emotional story behind it, and I think that's something that first Candyman covered very well. There's a lot of very relevant topics about racism and gentrification and things like that that are very much tied into here. So I don't really understand why people right off the bat are saying that this movie is too political, because literally the first movie did the exact same stuff. And so if you were expecting anything different from this, I don't know what to tell you, but either way, that's a whole different discussion. I was very excited to see how this film would turn out, and I have to say, Candyman is a much different film than what I was ultimately expecting, but it's still a very ambitious and very impressive. It's a very ambitious and generally chilling horror sequel that I very much did have a good time with and very much did do what I think it needed to. And we are just going to get into right now, starting off with the cast. I think right off the bat, that's definitely one of the best things about this entire movie. I think everyone is very well cast here. Starting off with Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, we know that he can act very well. He's definitely proven that within other films, and I think here he just does a really great job at playing this character of Anthony. You're immediately connected to him because you want him to be successful, but you also know the ramifications of what the Candyman legend can do, how this is really going to mess with him. And it's a very challenging role to pull off, because as Anthony gets deeper into uncovering more events about the Candyman, it really starts to get him to lose his sanity a bit, and eventually really does push him over the edge. And I thought, as an actor, I mean, he just did such a great job at delivering this material. I was very impressed by what he ended up doing here. I think especially towards the back half of this movie, there's a lot of challenging material that he has, and he really does just kind of go for it, and I think definitely gives probably the strongest performance within the entire film. Tiona Paris is also really strong here, though, as she usually is. I think she does a good job at playing this character that you can tell is very devoted to Anthony, but is also very concerned about him. She tries to show that support with, his art and things like that, but she doesn't really understand what he's fully got himself into, and I think she has some really great stuff towards the third act of this movie. I very much enjoyed her, and I think the chemistry between these two is rock solid. You really do buy into their relationship throughout this film. But another big standout of this movie, someone that you always, I think, can count on to be, one of the best elements of your film if he's in here, is Coleman Domingo, who plays Billy Burke, and plays probably one of the most intriguing characters of the entire film. This is a guy that does have a personal connection to the Candyman. I'm not going to spoil what it's all about, because they actually did a pretty good job of hiding that in the trailers. but he does have a very personal connection to this character, and with that comes a lot of backstory as well, and I thought he did a really good job. They went some directions with his character that I wasn't really expecting, and he really does chew up all of the scenery. He is truly one of the most underrated actors, I think, working today, but he's also a really great character actor. Like, just give him a role like this where he's playing this guy who, you know, you think he's just going to be like this expositional mouthpiece, but there's so much more layers to him, and Domingo really does dive deep into that. I really liked what he ended up doing here. The rest of the cast, I mean, everyone does a really strong job. Nathan Stewart-Jarrett provides a lot of great comedic relief in this film. I really liked what he ended up doing. Vanessa Williams is not in this movie a lot, but she definitely does have enough, I think, to the point where I really do love the fact that they were able to bring her back in this movie. I think she does some really strong work in this film, and overall, I was very impressed with what she ended up doing. I think the cast overall here was very strong. I don't really think there was a weak link in terms of acting, and I was pretty much impressed by everyone here. Now let's get to the directing and the writing, because while the acting here is really good, I think the directing is what really makes this film something special. I mean, holy shit, the vision that DeCosta has is something that is truly unique and something that I think really makes this film stand out overall. This is a horror film, but I would say more than anything, it's a lot more of this, you know, it's a lot more artsy than you really are expecting, and that's something I did appreciate from DeCosta. She has a very interesting way of structuring this film, and I don't know if everyone's going to be on board with it, but I think it has a very unique vision that I think really did work here and helps this film justify its existence. I mean, while DeCosta is portraying a lot of these events in a very horrifying manner, she also wants to kind of show a sense of, you know, I think tell a bit of a morality story, you know, the idea of the Candyman and things like that, and the way that she portrays a lot of these events, it is in the same way, I think, a very realistic drama about racial tensions within the world and things like that, and I think she does a really good job when it comes to the directing here. But there's also a lot more humor in this movie than I was expecting. She actually injects a lot of humor into this film, and I think it actually was successful for the most part. I was laughing quite a bit to this movie. I think overall she just did a really great job directing this, and it really bums me out when people weren't giving her the credit for this early on, because this absolutely is her film. This film would not be as good if it wasn't for DeCosta, and my God, after this, I cannot wait to see what she's going to do next, because she absolutely killed it here and definitely is one that is, I think, hands down the best element of this entire film. But her screenplay as well, I think, is really well done here. It does what a good sequel should do, a good horror sequel should do, where it does expand upon what we saw in the first movie, you know, when it comes to the Candyman and the legend. But this film wants to kind of dive deeper into the concept of the Candyman. The Candyman in this film is not just this one specific person. Yes, that story is still very much a part of this, but the Candyman is someone that was victimized, is someone that was disregarded by society, and I think we really do get to dive a bit deeper into that here. They really do expand the lore in a very interesting way, and I really did like the way that was handled and the way that Anthony sees a lot of comparisons to him with the Candyman, and why he is so connected to all of this, I thought was really well done. There's definitely elements in this film that we've seen before, like as you know, as the Candyman kills people, Anthony grows a lot more success, and he becomes a lot more, you know, he becomes a much more highly regarded artist in that way, but he's kind of like conflicted because he's not entirely sure what this means for him. But this is much different, I think, than the first film, because the first film, you know, our main character didn't really care much about what she was reporting on. She just kind of did it because she needed a story and she thought that this would be compelling to people. She didn't really care too much about the, you know, the ramifications of what this can do. Anthony does. He wants to know more about the Candyman. He wants to know what he's getting himself into, and so you really do feel connected to him in that way. But then also, like I said, through characters like Coleman Domingo, who have had their own sort of interactions with the Candyman before. I really liked what they ended up doing there. I thought that the screenplay was very well handled. for the most part, I think the first 2 acts are really well done and really do a good job of building up this mystery. You know, you're not entirely sure where this is really going to go. It doesn't go in the directions that you expect it to, and that's something I really did appreciate about this film. So I think the screenplay here overall is very well done. And as expected, yes, like I said, this film does have a lot of social commentary, as did the original. I don't particularly think any of it was, you know, overly done. I think it worked very naturally. You understand that these characters are going through a lot within their lives, obviously. You know, this is a town in which it used to be a place for black people, and now there's all, you know, these white people that are trying to take over, and, you know, the film wants to dive into deeper issues like police brutality and things like that. And I think all that stuff, it does handle really well, and you can understand the parallels for, you know, the Candyman story and how that relates to today. I think that's something that this film does a really good job with, is that it really does kind of get you to understand who the Candyman really is. It doesn't want to depict the Candyman as you know, a symbol of, you know, as a symbol of murder, more as a symbol of vengeance. I think that's really what they're trying to go for when it comes to the Candyman. The Candyman is not this sad figure that is, you know, taking his anger out on people. It really is like fighting back. So a lot of people do look at the Candyman in a much different way in this film than the first one, and I thought it worked very well. I really liked what they ended up doing there. Again, it was a really different idea, but I think it ultimately worked very well. And also, yes, there are a lot of references to the first movie. Obviously, Anthony was a character in the first movie, but the way the film kind of depicts certain events in that first movie is very different than what you would think. And I thought they did a good job with that. It kind of gets you to recontextualize some of the ideas that they explored in that film. And it didn't feel like a retread. It didn't feel like they were, you know, it didn't, for me at least, feel like it was detracting from that first movie. I thought they were able to bring up some other perspectives, and I think it made for a much more memorable experience than I think it ultimately could have been. So, and again, just there's so much more thought put into this movie than most horror movie sequels, and that alone, I think, makes this film really stick out to me. It's a little bit more than just character says Candyman's name in the mirror, and then character gets, you know, 5 times in the mirror, and then character gets murdered because of it. Like, there's a little bit more going on in this film, and that's still true of the first one, but I think even more so here. They really do try to do something different with the Candyman as a spirit, and I think it works really well in this film, and I honestly was really fascinated with what they decided to do with it, what they decided to do with the with you know, the legend here. I thought it was something very decidedly different, but I think it worked really well with the purpose that it was ultimately serving. The visual style to this movie, though, is definitely one to marvel over. I mean, I don't really think I've seen a horror film quite like this, especially a mainstream one, in quite a bit. I mean, not only are all of the stories of Candyman told through basically shadow puppets, which I thought was a really interesting idea, but almost every single killing that you see in this movie is done in basically a point of view shot. So you don't see all of the blood and the gore. You see it from someone else's perspective. So, like, let's say that you're looking at a mirror. You actually see it happen through the mirror. You're looking at a window. You see it happen through the perspective of the window. And I thought this was a really interesting idea because it really is kind of showing, it kind of reminds me of like classic horror films where they wouldn't really show the deaths on screen. Here, a lot of it is off screen, and I actually think it makes it a little bit more effective in that way. So I definitely really did appreciate that. They were definitely trying to go for something a bit more personal, and I think it ultimately did work quite well. And like I said, I think there's so many moments in this movie visual wise that are really going to stick out to me, and I really liked what they ended up doing there overall. And when it comes to the score as well in this movie, the score is really well done. It's very foreboding, it's very chilling, and it really does, I think, set the mood very well here. Unfortunately, the one thing that I think does bring down this film is the editing, not the first two acts. The first two acts are very well paced. I think overall they do a good job with that. But then the third act happens, and without spoiling anything, it felt like the third act, there were about an hour left of, story, an hour left of all these different plot revelations that is truncated to like 30 minutes, and it just feels rushed in that way. And again, I really do appreciate a lot of the ideas that they were going for, but there really is no time to process anything that's going on here. And so it felt like, we would get this big moment that really kind of changes the entire film. This big twist happens, and then we're immediately going to cut to something else, and then we're immediately going to cut to something else, and it just was too much after a while. And so I do think the third act did bring this movie down a little bit for me. And while I still thought it was generally effective where they decided to end the movie, I thought overall they could have done a better job at really getting us to process these revelations, show what it means to these characters, because I think overall it just felt a little bit too rushed to me, and I think that did ultimately bring the film down. The only other flaws I would have with Candyman, I would say, is that there is one killing that ends up happening about, I want to say, halfway through this film. You've seen it in the trailer, and it honestly doesn't really serve much of a purpose at all. It felt like it was just something that they did for the trailer, or people complain that there wasn't enough killing in this movie, because honestly, the kills are pretty sporadic. Like, even though, like I said, a lot of them are done off screen, they're not as constant as you would think they are. And that's something I did appreciate about this film, is that it's trying to be a lot more than just a slasher, and I think it does succeed at that. But it did feel like, there was a test audience and there wasn't enough killings, and they asked for another one, and so they put this one in here, and I just don't really feel it serves much of a purpose in the movie overall, and it just kind of did take me out of it. So I don't think they did a really great job with that. But overall, I think Candyman is generally very effective. It's got some really strong performances, a very good direction from Nia DeCosta, who I really hope continues to do horror films. She has a very artistic and unique look that I think is truly unparalleled in a lot of horror films. It has some of the best visuals I've seen of the entire year. Some really strong social commentary that ties in well to the main storyline. It does get a little bit muddled towards the end of the film. I think that there's a lot of moments that, could have been a little bit more impactful if they would have spent more time on it. But overall, I definitely really did enjoy Candyman quite a bit. I really enjoyed what they were going for. It's a very different kind of horror film than I expected, and that's something that I really did ultimately appreciate, especially with like how lackluster I think horror films have been this year. This is definitely one of the better ones, especially mainstream ones that we've had all year, and I'm absolutely going to give Candyman overall a B. But other than that, guys, in my review of Candyman, let me know what you guys saw this morale, lift your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.